So what is it that gives a human life its value? Today, we're diving into an article by Ruben Dario that really digs into this question. He argues that trying to redefine personhood can actually lead to something he calls the commodification of human worth. So let's explore his argument together.
And this is the core question, isn't it? Is human value something we're just born with, something totally inherent, or is it something we get based on our abilities, our stage of development, or maybe even just what society decides at any given time?
To build his case, the author kicks things off not with philosophy, but with biology. His foundational claim is that human life is, first and foremost, a scientific fact, not just some social or philosophical idea.
And here's his starting point, the zygote. He argues that from the very first moment of conception, this is a living organism. It's got its own unique DNA, and it's already directing its own growth and development. It's a whole, distinct being.
Now, to back this up, he doesn't just give his opinion. He actually quotes a standard embryology textbook. He's trying to ground his argument in what he sees as established scientific fact.
This slide really illustrates his key biological point, that human development is one single, continuous process. He's arguing that a human is a human from the very start, just at different stages of growth. Nothing new is added along the way to make it human.
Okay, so if humanness is a biological fact, you might be asking, why is there even a debate? Well, the author then moves on to critique this whole idea of redefining what a person is based on certain functions or abilities. Let's see how he breaks it down.
The article points to these 4 common ways people try to define personhood. And the author's argument is that every single one of these creates an arbitrary, and he would say, potentially dangerous line.
All right, first up, consciousness. If that's what makes you a person, what do we do about someone in a coma? We don't strip them of their rights and declare them a non-person, right? So the author argues that just can't be the standard.
Okay, next, what about sentience, the ability to feel pain? The author says this is where things get really complicated. If an adult animal can feel more pain than a human newborn, does that mean it has more rights? He argues this creates a totally confusing and inconsistent standard.
Then there's viability, the ability to survive outside the womb. The author's critique here is that this is a moving target. It totally depends on technology and where you are. A baby might be viable in a top-tier city hospital, but not in a rural one. So he asks, does a person's fundamental right to life really depend on their zip code?
And all this leads to his challenge of the final criteria, the idea that personhood is just a social agreement. He points to foundational documents like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to argue that our value is supposed to be inherent, not something a government or society can just grant or take away.
Okay, so now the author pivots to address a major counter-argument, bodily autonomy. And he explores this not just as a right, but also in the context of responsibility.
His argument is that, look, in any society, our personal autonomy has limits. And he specifically claims that when a voluntary act leads to a pregnancy, it creates a new duty of care for the new, dependent human life that's been created.
And to show this isn't some radical idea, he points to other areas where society already limits our autonomy for the greater good, things like parental duties, the military draft, or even public health rules. So he asks, why would pregnancy be the one single exception?
And this quote really captures the absolute core of his argument, that the choice to create a dependent life comes with a responsibility that, in his view, you can't just set aside.
So, stepping back, what's really at stake here for society? The author warns about the dangers of creating a hierarchy of human value, a system where some lives are just considered more valuable than others. This isn't just an abstract idea. For him, it's about the very principles we use to protect the most vulnerable people among us.
And he's not just speaking hypothetically. He points to data from a recent Pew Research study, which suggests that for a large majority of young Americans, personhood is seen as conditional. This data really illustrates the cultural shift that he's analyzing.
But then he points out something really interesting. When people actually see a 3D or 4D ultrasound of a fetus, their perspective often shifts. It suggests there's a real gap between an abstract idea of a fetus and the reality of seeing a developing life form. This quote from the philosopher Robert P. George really sums up the author's argument perfectly. Being less developed is a difference in degree, not a difference in kind. Think about it. It's like the difference between a toddler and an adult, not the difference between a human and a rock.
All right, so we've walked through the biology, the philosophical definitions, and the legal arguments.
And that brings us to the author's final, ultimate argument about what's truly at stake here.
And here it is, the core warning of the entire article. If our worth isn't inherent, if it's not just part of being human, then it becomes a commodity. And that means it can be assigned, it can be measured, and, terrifyingly, it can be taken away. In his view, this threatens the very foundation of universal human rights that's supposed to protect every single one of us.
So, the author leaves us with this final provocative question. If our worth isn't just a natural part of being human, then who gets to decide? Who becomes the judge of what a life is worth? It's a question that really gets to the heart of what it means to be human.